Hey everyone, God bless you. Welcome to this Tech Tuesday. My reflection today I've entitled, The Day This Priest Got His Cell Phone. And I'd like to reflect just a little bit with you about my own personal history with the cell phone. I was born in the 60s. There was no such thing as cell phone. We didn't even dream of such a thing. We had landlines in our homes and we had payphones on the streets. We needed to call someone. We would put a dime in and make a call. In the mid-'80s, in 1985, I went to college in Santa Barbara, and I got a job my first year working at a gas station in the late afternoons until the early morning, from 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. It was a great job because people stopped coming in for gas about 8, and that gave me about 5 hours of paid study time. It was back when gas stations had self-serve and full-serve. And so the gas station attendant, that would be me, had to be ready not just to process the payment of the self-serve, but if a car pulled into the full-serve, you had to run out there, check the tires, pop the hood, check the oil, put the gas in, be polite and greet the customer. And one night late, I was working, and in came this marvelous green Rolls Royce. And I ran out there and began to provide the service. And I noticed that it had on the top of its roof a large antenna. And the person who was in the car was very pleasant, got out and ended up having a long conversation with me and showed me his cool cell phone. This cell phone was like this large. It was like several footballs basically put together. You had to kind of hold it like this in order to use it. But it was my first realization that perhaps cell phones were coming. By the way, that person was John Travolta, a young John Travolta, believe it or not, back in 1985, who was passing through Santa Barbara. From 1985, when I saw that cell phone in Travolta's car, until 98, 13 years later, I still had no cell phone. Nobody I knew had cell phones. They were just coming out in like the second half of the 90s. And I finished being an assistant priest, and I was appointed to the pastorate here of St. Andrew on May 1st of 1998. And I came here and I met our beloved deacon. Proto-Deacon Lee had a brand new cell phone, and that began a conversation between myself and the deacon. And I was, what shall I say, deeply suspicious about cell phones and whether or not I wanted one. I thought to myself, the first thought I had when I saw it was, that is a tether. That is a chain that is going to be put around my neck, and I'll never be able to escape it. I still feel that way. Although I did concede and got a cell phone. Of course, this is long before smartphones became popular. It was just a flip phone. But Deacon convinced me that it would help me and that it would be good for him to be able to reach me and it would have some benefits, which is true. But let me reflect just for a moment about pastors and cell phones and let you know that some of my concerns from the beginning I hold as great concerns to this day. The true model for any interaction between a parishioner and the pastor is the face-to-face interaction. This is where authentic human communication can take place. Full-orbed communication, not just words, but also body language and touch and encouragement. And this is where the least amount of confusion takes place. This is where misunderstandings are brought to a minimum, and also face-to-face communication between a pastor and a parishioner is extremely powerful. You can pray, you can anoint them, you can make the cross on their heads, hear their confessions, put your stole around them. And we are not just voices, right? We are embodied persons. So that is the norm. That is the norm. And all throughout human history, if you wanted to talk to your pastor, you went and saw him. You went and saw him. And that also is something very important. It shows a level of seriousness. It grants to the communication a level of seriousness that is important so that the pastoral relation is not trivialized. Does that mean that you should never have any other kind of communication with your pastor? I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that the role of the pastor is not a trivial one. We're not here just for little ditties here and there. The normative means of communication between a pastor and his parishioners is face-to-face. About the same time, a little bit before the cell phone came along, emails came along, and I was exceedingly suspicious about email as a mode of communication with the parish, and decided early on that it was a sufficient mode for basic communication, for sending out informative material, but not a valuable mode of communication for interacting about personal matters with parishioners. And so email has its place, but it has to be very carefully guarded not to descend into communication which is limited by email, that should be taking place face-to-face. So we pastors, we have to use email communication for certain things, like announcing parish schedules and sending out updates about what's going on in the parish, etc., and not for other things, like allowing ourselves to try to type out pastoral guidance or something, when in fact it needs to be done face-to-face. I was concerned about email. I was really concerned about the cell phone. And I remain convinced that cell phone usage between pastor and parishioner should be exceedingly small. Exceedingly small. I have no wish and have never published my cell phone to my hundreds and hundreds of parishioners. That would be an absolute, complete, and total nightmare to have to be constantly answering requests and interactions by cell phone with parishioners. And that is not a good idea. I'm most concerned about the idea of texting. Texting itself, which exploded after the cell phone was created, especially as soon as smartphones came in the early 2000s, texting started, and wow, became a global phenomenon immediately. I remember one of my children who had a phone and began texting, and I was first getting the record from the cell phone companies about how many texts were being sent. And I was amazed to see 8, 9, 10,000 texts sent in 1 month. Divide that by 30 days. How could that many texts, 300 texts or something per day, be sent? How could that possibly be? I remember scratching my head. The process, the language of texting is so limited. The number of words are so limited. It's such a subhuman form of communication. I'm not saying that there isn't some benefit to texting, but it should have almost nothing to do with the sacred relationship between pastor and parishioner. Almost nothing. There's an exceedingly limited usage of that. I consented 25 years ago to getting a cell phone, and it has been a wild ride from 1998 to 2023, an absolutely wild ride, trying to make sure that the cell phone was my slave, my servant, and not vice versa. And I fear too often vice versa is the case in many of our lives. And let's hold up our relationship with our pastors. Let us refuse to trivialize them by email and texting and cell phone usage. Let's meet face to face, like all of our brothers and sisters have done from the beginning of the church until now, with our pastors, so that really full-orbed, sacred, impactful communication can take place. God be with you.